Have you ever wondered why, on this singular night of Halloween, that people hide under scary costumes and wander around in groups singing and laughing, knocking on doors of neighbours and strangers alike, asking for food or a treat? It is a wild, fun night where it seems anything goes. Many, though, are oblivious that on this night anything goes in the darkness too. They think their torches and lanterns can hold back the night, that their brash costumes and loud noises will keep the shadows at bay. They won't, because just at the edge of that torchlight, creeping at the rim of the lantern's glow, are fairies, and lots of them. Halloween, or Samhain, is one of my favourite times of the year because it's a time when fairies are most active. The veil between our world and the other world is at its thinnest. The cycle of the natural world marks this change between the light half of the year and the dark half of the year. And on that night, there is a brief suspension. It is neither light or dark, old or new, it just is. Did you know some believe that fairies try to collect as many souls as they can on Halloween? Others that fairies steal mortal men and marry them off to fairy women. But it's not just mortal men. They will also steal healthy human babies, livestock, and even family pets. And on this night, they will play all manner of malicious tricks on anyone that they can get their hands on. It is a wild night where anything goes. I have a collection of 4 true accounts of fairies behaving strangely at Halloween. A man named Pat King lived in Lauderdale. One November's Eve, his sister and sister-in-law visited him. They decided to do a trick that was customary on November's night, that being to steal a cabbage and leave it out in a field for the dreaded puka in hope that it would keep him away from their home. On the way, they met a man dressed all in white atop a white horse. This man, they said, wasn't right. They became afraid of him and ran home. When they told Pat King about it, he said it was only some neighbour who was out to frighten people on November Eve. Meanwhile, his wife went into the back room and was heard to call out, "Mary!" Mary being Pat King's sister's name. So Mary rushed into the room and found the woman fallen to the floor, dead. A few neighbours came to the house the very same night for to sympathise and said that they also saw a man in white atop a white horse with a woman perched in front of him coming from Pat King's house. They came to the conclusion that Pat King's wife was taken by the fairies and that the fairy was coming for her the first time he was seen and that he was taking her away the second time he was seen. Late that night, a man named Doty was travelling on horseback and he was passing a town called Corofin. It was known there was a woman, one of the good folk, who used to be seen on a bridge on the road that he was travelling. Doty crossed this said bridge, and on reaching the other side, his horse stopped and could not be moved. Doty turned in his saddle to look back at the bridge, only to see her sitting right there behind him. He told her to get down off his horse, but she simply shook her head, no. Doty told her again to get away, but was met with a cruel, cold smile. So Doty pulled his knife and struck her with it. The horse kicked off at once, and the woman was gone. The next morning, Doty returned to the bridge with a friend, and all that could be found was a bone with his knife stuck in it. 7 years ago, on November's Eve, my sister Julia and I went to Dackland Fort to gather blackberries. It was a very lonely place, having no houses near it. The blackberries were good and plentiful, and so we delayed a good while. Just before leaving, we heard music, very sweet and low. We went to the place where we thought it was coming from, but it was farther away. Each time we looked for it, the sound moved to another place quite near. We could not know what instrument was playing, but it resembled more the chiming of bells. Suddenly we noticed the sun had set and a coldness engulfed us. We became very afraid and ran home at once. We told what happened to our family and the neighbours who were gathered there, and were told that others had heard that music at the fort before, and that it was the good people trying to lure us away. Tom Crane was going home at midnight from Brada Mine to his home at Colby. The road was lonely, and he met no person, but the full moon was shining, and it was as light as day as he began to pass under the trees that grow around the house at Ballacurry. A little dog appeared suddenly from the black shadow at the roadside and followed at his heels. He whistled to it, but as he turned his head to look at it, it ran on in front of him, and for a minute he couldn't see it. When he came in sight of it again, he was terrified to see that it had grown larger, as big as a goat, and it grew bigger and bigger till it was the size of a donkey. It galloped before him and disappeared round the bend of the road where the gate of Ballacurry House is. When Tom came to the gate, he saw a very tall, thin man leaning on it with his arms folded on the top of it. The beast he had seen was gone. As Tom reached the gate, the tall, thin man turned and walked up the long path that leads to the house. When he got to the door, he turned again and walked back down the path towards Tom. By the bright moonlight, Tom saw the lace ruffle round his neck, the satin of his knee breeches, the silk of his stockings, and the shining buckles on his shoes, the dress of bygone days. And his face was white and dreadful. As Tom looked at him, he was all at once taken with terror and ran off as fast as he could down the road to Colby. He had not gone far when he met two of his friends, Ben Mylechreest and Bill Tear. He told them what he had just seen, and they made fun of him and wouldn't believe that he had seen any such thing. They said they'd go back with him to the gate and see for themselves. So they all three turned back for Ballacurry House, and when they got to the gate, they saw the big man, as tall as two men, walking up the path with his back towards them. As before, when he reached the door, he turned, and exactly what they saw then, they never told any man. They took to their heels, all three, and ran till they could run no longer. They were trembling from head to foot, and the sweat pouring off them. They were too terrified to go home, so they turned in with Tom, and there stayed until the sun rose. Never mind ghosts and ghouls, it's fairies you should be wary of this Halloween. They can and do take many forms. They are clever. They have long memories and they can steal you away to a place you can't leave. Halloween is the perfect time for them to settle old scores or steal that thing or person that they have been coveting. You've been warned. If you enjoyed this video, please show it some love by hitting that like button. You know, there really should be a love button, shouldn't there? And if you really enjoy my videos, please consider buying me a coffee. It really helps. The link is in the notes below. Until next time, stay curious and be kind. Cheerio!